Hello, BookTube, it's Roz, and I'm going to do a rather spontaneous tag, which I'm doing on Sunday evening. I may not put it up till Tag Tuesday, we'll see. But it's the spoiler tag, or I should rephrase that, the extraordinary original spoiler tag by Scott and Nell of Gunpowder Seeds. I want to say Gunpowder Treason and Plot, and I mean Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, don't I? And what an inspired idea for a tag, because it's one of those bookish topics that a tag gives us a chance to kind of unpick from each of our different perspectives. And I've already seen, I think, Courtney and Daniel Guilty Feet and Jay Shay and Sean the Bookmaniac and Beth Ann have all done it, and Sean wonderfully tagged me because if he hadn't, I think I was going to have to just do it regardless. So, get to the prompts, Roz. What do you consider a spoiler? Now, good question, because but I think there's probably going to be quite a consensus about this. A spoiler has to be something that spoils a book. Now, of course, what's going to spoil a book is different for different people, isn't it? And there's not a lot that anyone else could say that would spoil a book for me. To explain, generally, when I'm reading, I am more interested in the how of what I'm reading. The style, characterization. Yes, the way that it's written, than I am in the what. I'm not as interested in the what. So probably, if you tell me what's going to happen at the end, say, or that, so something that's going to happen to a particular character, that might be a spoiler for someone else, but it might not actually be a spoiler for me. If it was the kind of book that would really spoil, I might not be reading it anyway. Which brings me to prompt number two, because Scott and Nell wisely ask, does the genre you're reading affect what you consider to be a spoiler? And yes, obviously it does. There are anything that is more plot driven, spoilers are more of a risk, aren't they? So, mystery, thriller, horror, romance, all of those, there's a higher risk of something being a spoiler. I'm not a huge genre reader, so but I do read some. Now, so if you told me the denouement of some mystery detective novel or whatever, I probably just wouldn't bother to read it. I'd really, if you said, oh, I read this brilliant, detective novel, murder mystery or whatever, by this author, and this happened, and there was this great twist at the end, and that was the twist, then what I would probably do is look for another book by the same author, because books of that kind, people usually write multiple ones, don't they? So yes, off I go and find another, and have the same pleasure that you had. Prompt number three: all the best bits are in the trailer. Yeah, people say that about films, don't they? Sometimes the synopsis can be too detailed. Do you research books prior to reading them, or go in blind, not knowing? Now, this links back, funnily enough, to another absolutely brilliant tag that Scott and Nell also came up with, the DNF tag. If you're new to BookTube and you haven't done the DNF tag, it's really one that's worth going and looking for and doing some time, because it really gets you thinking. So DNF, as in did not finish, bailing on a book. Now, I am not someone who likes giving up on a book. Now, that's not to say that I think it's the wrong thing to do. If you're reading a book and you're not enjoying it, and it's not doing anything for you, then why carry on? Absolutely fine to stop. But it's not something I don't want to spend time starting books and then discarding them. That doesn't appeal to me at all. So yes, I do research a book before I read it. I want every book I read to count. And if a book's 200 pages, I'll take more risks and research less. If it's 1,000 pages, unless it's, I don't know, by an author that I absolutely know, unless it's Dickens or something, or Trollope, you know, there's no way I'm going to embark on that without having found out a bit more. That doesn't mean to say that I will always, I'm careful where I do that finding out more from. So a good recommendation from a booktuber whose opinion I trust and who I know has, tastes that overlap with mine. That would be one. I'd still probably go and look up the author and look up the book a bit. Reviews. Now, professional reviewers rarely do serious spoilers. It's the tools of the trade. They know not to do that. So it's unusual. The things I find that I have to be careful of are Goodreads reviews, where you sometimes yeah, and yes, sometimes blurbs are just a little bit too informative. Um, but yeah, so yes, I do research and I take the risk that there might be an element of spoiler effect, but it's not a big risk for me because, as I say, I'm always looking for the how rather than the what. Prompt number 4. Sometimes the introduction or translators' notes can spoil the ending, especially for classics. Has that ever happened to you? Yes, absolutely. And I'd say Penguin Classic editions, but there's other things like that. It's a terrible mistake generally to read the introduction before you read the book. Even when it's a classic that you half know, it's still probably going to spoil it to some extent. Much better to leave them to the end. Um, yeah, if it's some really, really old classic where I know quite a lot about the book and I think a bit more context and analysis might help me get to grips with it. Paradise Lost, for example, you're not going to not read the introduction to Paradise Lost in the Penguin Classic edition to avoid spoilers, but well, obviously you're not because the story anyway. So but for the most part, I'm wary of that. Now, name a time somebody spoiled a novel for you. Well, you know, I really can't think of one. I've probably got nice friends who are careful about that. Most people on BookTube are quite careful. People tend to say, if they're doing a review and it's going to be very spoilery, they would generally flag that. Um, and, the only people who sometimes spoil a book for me with spoilers of a sort are the authors. There's nothing that I hate more. Well, of course, there are things, like, world hunger and, but, in bookish terms, there's nothing I hate more than an author that kind of flags up what's going to happen in such a clumsy way that, I've guessed it far too early and yeah, that does spoil a book for me, and that would be a reason why I wouldn't read another book by that author. um yeah. Question number 6. Have you ever spoiled a novel for somebody else? I hope not, and I don't think so. Now, there's a prompt coming in a couple along the line, which is about uh, are you careful about spoilers when you're reviewing a book, and does it limit you? And I'm going to talk about one, I think, in answer to that, where I might have spoilt it a bit for some people and why I thought it was okay to go ahead. But generally, I'm really careful. Now, of course, it depends on the book, doesn't it? If it, for some books, I think it helps to prepare someone a bit for what they're going to read. I think a teacher, would talk about that. Um, in some books, everyone knows the ending anyway. You can't spoil Pride and Prejudice maybe by saying, "Oh, Elizabeth and Darcy are going to end up together," because it's almost built into the form of the book that that's going to happen, and everyone's kind of heard that perhaps before they read it. But there are times when I've had to make a really conscious effort not to spoil something. Now, for example, let's think Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Okay, now that is a book where if you've read lots of Hardy books, um, me talking about the ending would not spoil it for you because you'll kind of know from really early on the kind of ending that it's probably going to have, because you know how hard he writes and you know the kind of plot he does. But if I'm talking to about that book to someone who's never read, this is going to be their first Hardy, and all the 19th century novels they've read so far have had, conventional happy endings, then I'm going to be very, very careful. Like, say, when I handed that book to Tilly, and said, "Oh, I think you could read this now. You're old enough. You'd enjoy this now." I don't know, she was probably like 12 or 13 or something. Oh, I would not have dreamed of telling her what was going to happen, because I wanted her to experience all that emotion, fresh and for herself. So there we go. So I hope I've never spoiled something that I shouldn't. Tilly will probably now comment on this video to say, yes, you did, you often did, you were always doing it. We'll see. Question number 7. Is spoilers ruin novels? Are there some authors or genres that you can't reread? Now, this means you have to think about why you reread things. And there's a few reasons, I think. Well, I'm not a big rereader, but there are a few reasons why I do reread. One reason I'd reread a book is because I want to better see and understand what the author was doing, how they were doing it. Say, I like the how. So the fact that I now know the ending is almost part of the enjoyment of rereading, because I'm then thinking, how do they get there? And that can even apply to something like an Agatha Christie, where you reread it and think, oh yes, she did flag that up, or she did drop that in there. So even a kind of a mystery type novel, if it's a good one, can be reread and just appreciated in a different way. So that's one reason for rereading. Another reason for rereading is to relive the experience of reading it. If I reread a Jane Austen at regular intervals, is because I almost want to anticipate. I've built in my own spoilers, and I'm anticipating that funny scene, that dramatic moment. Yeah, it's a spoiler fest, and that's part of the fun of the rereading. Some things I might reread because I want to find out if I feel differently about them now I'm a different person, because I'm however many years older than I was when I read it for the first time. And again, knowing, what's going to happen is probably not an issue there. The kinds of books that you wouldn't reread because of the spoiler effect are probably things that I wasn't going to reread anyway. I suppose that's the truth. Question number 8. When reviewing, are you spoiler free? And does this limit your ability to discuss things? Now, I vary. I try to be predominantly spoiler free. If I'm doing one of my kind of scallydandle videos where if I'm talking about a book that I think people are watching this because they're intrigued to hear what a book from, I don't know, Benin is like, but they're probably never going to read it, then I'm not too worried about spoilers if I think it'll kind of help me kind of talk about the book enthusiastically. But I wouldn't do blatant ones, but it's not in my head to worry about it. If I will consciously think, is a spoiler going to matter here? For a couple of examples, Hilary Mantel, reviewing her, books about Cromwell, I just assumed that everyone knows the history, the real life history, and because they're based on real life history, that I didn't have to worry about spoilers. I threw in loads of spoilers because I quite, in talking about those books, I absolutely talked about some of the amazing endings that some of those books had, that trilogy, like ending with an execution, say, and anyone that just didn't have a clue about Tudor history would probably have been struggling to read the book anyway without knowing more. So I wouldn't feel guilty about that and didn't worry about it. Now, the example that I worry slightly that maybe I did a spoiler that I shouldn't have done was a book called The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree that I reviewed just a few months ago, not that long ago. Book from Iran, or by an Iranian author. And I said, and spoiler alert for this, I said in my review video quite early on that the narrator of the book is a teenage ghost. And when I read it, I had managed not to pick that up from it. I hadn't read that many sort of blurbs or whatever, and the reviewers had perhaps not said it. I don't know. I hadn't kind of absorbed that. So when I came to that character's death, which was fairly early in the novel, then it was like lots of my bemusement that I'd been feeling up to that point kind of fell away, and I enjoyed the book much more thereafter. In saying it in my review, I suppose I thought to myself, my tolerance for being bemused and befuddled by a book is pretty high. I'll keep going even when I'm feeling like, what the hell is going on here? I will keep going. But I know that for an awful lot of readers, they might have bailed on that book before they got to the point where that kind of fell into place. I also knew that when I looked at actual copies of the book rather than just opening on an e-reader, that the blurb also told you that. So I didn't feel like it was sort of giving too much away. But if I did spoil it for anyone by doing that, I'm really sorry. So, that's all the kind of prompty prompts, but the final prompt is shout out. Tell us about 5 channels you enjoy and tag them. And I've already seen loads of people that I might have tagged be tagged by other people, so that's good because that cuts down the numbers. I haven't seen anyone want to tag Steve Donahue yet, though, so I better tag him, whether or not I enjoy, just because otherwise he'll be upset, and he'll really enjoy doing this. I think it's a good tag for him. He'll probably just do it for his own back. So who shall I tag? I'm going to tag Sarah of Hardcover Hearts because I've noticed that she's quite careful about spoilers in her reviews and flagging them up. So I'll be interested to hear what she says about this. I'm going to tag Kit of Kit's World just because I'm really enjoying his channel at the moment, and the same goes for Barb and Isabella of the Font, and because Barb is so delightfully opinionated, which she'll go off on one about this, and that'll be nice. Jim of Books, Reading and Stuff. Look forward to yours, Jim. I know it will be great. I'm going to tag finally Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics because I always enjoy it when he does a tag. So that I think is 5, and with Steve as kind of was like my bonus one. I think I'm allowed to get away with. Enjoy this tag, everybody, and do it even if you're not tagged.